Welcome to another episode of Sustainability Forward, our podcast where we discuss the relevant and pertinent issues related to sustainability. Today we have a very important topic on hand, which is the economics of climate change. And to discuss that with us, we have a very important guest on our podcast. Carmine, would you please like to welcome our esteemed guest?
Yes, thank you, Rishi. It's today it's really a pleasure to have Karl Schmedders. He's a friend. He's coming from MD Business School in Lausanne, in Switzerland, a world-leading executive education. Karl is a professor of finance at MD. He research and teaching at MD currently focus on the economics of climate change. Karl believes that finance and economics offer many tools to combat climate change, and that the power of incentives and markets can be employed to make progress. In addition, businesses and consumers need to take a leading role in the research in search for solutions to the climate crisis, not just wait for government and policymakers to introduce climate change for solution for the climate crisis. So before joining MD in 2019, Karl was professor of quantitative business administration at the University in Zurich and associate professor with tenure at Kellogg School of Management. He received a PhD in operations research from Stanford University. He is a fellow of the Game Theory Society and an SAT Economic Theory Fellow. So Karl, welcome to the show.
Wrishi and Carmine, it's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Karl. And as I said, yes, you are based in Switzerland. Just yesterday, the World Meteorological Organization, based there in Lausanne, just released the State of Climate Report for 2023. So we see the past year, already the hottest year ever documented. So we're talking about an average near surface temperature of 1.45 Celsius degrees above the pre-industrial baseline. And sadly, also we see records that were broken for greenhouse gas levels, ocean heat and acidification, sea level rise, Antarctic sea cover, and glaciers retreat. That's quite important in Switzerland. So things are worsening. So the tragedy is continuing. Karl, what's your take?
Thank you for your question, Carmine. Indeed, things are not yet getting better. In fact, they continue to get worse. In addition to the numbers that you mentioned from the WMO report, recently it was also reported that we had a new record on total CO2 emissions and CO2 equivalent emissions on the globe in 2023. So instead of making progress, we continue to make things much, much worse. Now, as you mentioned in the introduction, I really believe that we need to use the tools of economics and concepts from economics to understand why do we have climate change. It's not that people are sitting around and deliberately want to do bad things. That's absolutely not the case. It just happens that climate change is a side effect of economic activities by humans on the globe. And one nice or very helpful, instructive way to look at it is a concept from game theory called the tragedy of the comets. What is that? It's actually quite an old concept. It was made famous by an American biologist, Garrett Hardin, who gave a presidential address at the Society of Biologists in the United States in 1968, and he called his address the tragedy of the commons. It described that when we have a common resource, everyone overuses this common resource, and therefore the resource is depleted. Carmen, you mentioned the glaciers as a Swiss element. On the tragedy of the commons, there is a very strong Swiss element. In Swiss German, there is this concept of the Alment. What is that? This exists to this day around Switzerland, that farmers in villages actually do not own the grassland where they bring their cows or sheep, but it's a common resource that belongs to all of them. And then now let's imagine that Wrishi, you and I are the local farmers. And all of us bring 10 cows, and 30 cows is just perfect. The grassland can handle 30 cows. But then I get greedy and I say, oh, why should I have only 10 cows? I want 12 or 15. So I bring more cows. And then you say, oh, Karl is not very nice. We bring also 15 cows. We want to be as rich as Karl. And then we have overgrazing and destruction of this common resource. This has been documented, for example, in overfishing in many areas of the world. And I could give more examples of that. Now, of course, in Switzerland, there are rules locally to manage the commons. This goes back to the work of a Nobel Prize winner, Elinor Ostrom, who analyzed successful commons management. But where we're not successful yet is the commons of the atmosphere. The atmosphere around the globe belongs to all of us. It's a common that belongs to 200 some countries around the earth. And so because these countries can't agree on how much do you pollute, how much do I pollute, everyone uses it as a dumping ground for CO2, for methane, and other greenhouse gases. And so there we have the quintessential tragedy of the commons. The countries cannot agree to reduce the emissions because as countries got richer, and there's strong economic data on that, historically, as countries got richer, as the GDP per capita in these countries went up, we polluted more. This happened to the countries that are now rich in the European Union, Switzerland, America or Canada, but we also see now the emerging economies. I often look at the data in Southeast Asia of countries such as Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Hong Kong, Singapore. They are going, or in terms of the rich countries, Hong Kong and Singapore already went the same path. So we are all greedy, we all want to have a better life, and so therefore, historically, all countries and still many pollute a lot, and that's the tragedy of the commons in the context of climate change.
It's interesting, Karl. By the way, we just did an episode of couple of around decoupling economic growth and CO2 emissions. So, and we took a few examples, let's say positive in the UK, we talk about Sweden, then on the other side of the world, we talk about California, and intentions going on in China and India. So major efforts on decoupling the two. So you see GDP growing on the other side, CO2 coming down, at least for mature economies.
Carmine, this is absolutely correct. If you look at also countries in Western Europe, I recently looked at data from Denmark, France, Germany. They still continue to grow, albeit by a very small rate, but they have managed to do exactly this coupling that you described, Carmine. And so they have reduced their CO2 emissions while still growing. A great example in Europe is also Poland. Poland has gotten much, much richer since the Iron Curtain came down in the 90s, but at a level of emissions that's roughly constant. So it is possible for, as you said, Carmine, the mature economies, but if we look at these tiger states, the emerging economies that need a huge amount of energy, cheap energy, there, unfortunately, we do not see this decoupling. They still get a lot of the energy they need to develop from burning fossil fuels.
Yeah, also because some of the production that was in the countries before now is moving, so it's been externalized to somebody else. So they are also taking the burden of producing more, especially manufacturing, and this is related also to emissions.
Carmine, again, you're making an excellent point. Thank you. We need to distinguish between the production of CO2 in a country and what we call the consumption of the products with CO2. And so we see in the Western world that the emissions of the goods we consume is higher than of the goods produced in these countries. Let me illustrate this with an example. If I for example, drive a used BMW that was produced in Germany, but then it was taken in that math out of Germany because I am consuming it. I'm the consumer using this car. And so it's added to the consumption in Switzerland. Now, countries such as Denmark, France, and Germany have managed to bring both numbers down, the consumed and the produced CO2 emissions. Switzerland is slightly different. In Switzerland, we have seen a bit of an upward trend in the consumed emissions, despite a downward trend in the produced emission. Again, Carmine, a very important and excellent point. Thank you.
Excellent. Karl, given your background, this is a question that I've been wanting to ask, which is that we think we know what economics is. We think we have an idea of what climate change is. Could you help us put these two things together, right? What is essentially the economics of climate change, and why is it different from economics as we traditionally know it?
Thank you, Wrishi. Great question. And actually, your question really gets at the heart of the issue. There's a famous quote by Richard Toll, a climate scientist in the UK, who said, "Climate change is the mother of all externalities." And the famous climate scientist, Sir Nicholas Stern, said climate change is the greatest market failure of the world. So what are they talking about? As I said at the beginning, nobody really deliberately pollutes the planet. However, when we do good things for the economic development, there's a side effect, and that side effect are emissions. Let me illustrate this with an example. A wonderful product is cement. Cement really helps us to make beautiful building, high rises. Wherever you need concrete, you also need cement. So I like to be cool in the summer when it's hot outside, and I like to be warm in the winter when it's very cold outside. So I like a building with big walls made out of concrete. So concrete and cement are great products. They really help economies to build roads, housing for their people, and improve the quality of life. Unfortunately, when we produce cement, we need a lot of energy, and there's also a chemical reaction in the manufacturing of cement that also produces CO2. And that CO2 is emitted. And we're not paying a fee for that. I have to say aside, in the meantime, in some jurisdictions, for example, in Europe, you do pay for this. But traditionally, we have not paid for this. And it's outside market. There's no price for the emissions traditionally. And that's what Richard Toll meant by the externality. It's external to markets. And as a result, capitalism or market economics, which has done a lot of good for humanity, for those countries who have embraced capitalism to various degrees. Now, unfortunately, here capitalism or markets do not properly function. And that's what Sir Stern meant by the market failure. Now, here, all of us at some point heard from Adam Smith about the invisible hand, that the invisible hand of the market leads to a good outcome. the technical expression is a Pareto efficient outcome. But it leads to an outcome where we all do our own business, but socially there's a favorable outcome. And this invisible hand cannot do its work when we have externalities. And then we talk about market failure. So that's really the key issue here. People are doing good things. They are producing products that they can sell where there is demand for these great products. Unfortunately, while using this product or making it, we do harm to the planet. So the bad externalities, market failure, pollution comes with the good.
Excellent. Karl, can you give us an example of an externality, which is of a global size that the world has somehow managed to incorporate into economics in the past so that we can compare it vis-a-vis climate change?
Certainly. So on the climate change side, a lot of people point to the Montreal Treaty. So these were sorry, unfortunately, I don't know these fluorocarbons that were in spray bottles. And that was a great product. It helped to spray whatever you were spraying, maybe whipped cream or for hairstylist, hairspray out of the bottle. It was a really great product, but it had a side effect that wasn't priced, an externality that it created. It destroyed the ozone layer, and we had the famous ozone hole. Now there, the world got together and in the Montreal Treaty said, we have to do something about it. This is really dangerous. The ozone hole leads to a lot of skin cancer, and there's a big problem there. Now, why did this work? Why was the world to get to that point? Because there was a technological alternative that was very affordable and could be easily blown up so large that it was easy to replace the bad product. It maybe was a little more expensive, but not that much expensive. And so the world got together. The issue now is that in many countries, burning coal or burning oil or other fossil fuels is still so much cheaper for them than green alternatives, such as solar, hydro, or wind turbines. And that's a problem why we haven't been able to use the same approach on how to overcome this externality and the negative impact on the environment. Another example, that's more sort of the textbook example when we teach this, are in many countries, we have tobacco taxes and quite high tobacco taxes. Tobacco and smoking has been shown to cause lung cancer and other lung diseases. These people who smoke and then require more health care create a negative health externality on the healthcare system. And so you, Wrishi, you, Carmine, and I, we all pay higher healthcare costs, have higher healthcare costs. And so that's also across many countries and jurisdictions who then address this with a tax. And that's now, why do I like to mention this example? This is now also the solution we see in more and more countries, that we need to tax CO2, just like we tax tobacco, in order to address this negative externality. Thank you for the question, Wrishi.
That's a great example. Karl, I'm going to ask something that may or may not be related to this discussion, right? As you mentioned, Adam Smith, I was thinking about John Nash, who said that Adam Smith was not fully correct in the sense that, individual ambition does not always serve the common good, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that if everyone's looking out for themselves, no one will win, right?
Yeah.
In Is there an analogy to what John Nash said related to what needs to be done for climate change?
Yeah, now you're diving deep into economics. Yeah, that in game theory, when we have a monopoly power or oligopoly, then we get very different economic outcomes than in what Adam Smith was thinking when we have a highly competitive economy with many producers and customers. So that's sort of a very different approach. And so, yeah, of course, we can think of the tragedy of the commons as a special case of the prisoner's dilemma game. This is a particular example, perhaps the most famous example of examples in game theory, where everyone is looking out for themselves. Everyone wants to get rich. Every country is looking out for its own GDP per capita and is really neglecting the other countries. And because two or more countries do that, that's then leads to the tragedy of the commons. So as you nicely point out, Wrishi, that game theory and the ideas of the Nash equilibrium, the Nash concept, is closely related to the view of climate change via the tragedy of the commons. So I like to teach it that there's a microeconomic view or a microeconomic explanation from the game theory side, tragedy of the commons. And then there's a macroeconomic view from what we, the technical expression is the general equilibrium theory, the foundation of macroeconomics. And that's then, from that viewpoint, it's the existence of externalities and the absence of perfect markets. So we have clear analyses coming out of economics on why we have the problems that we face.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Karl. And so the invisible hand probably will not help us. That's clear from what you said. But it's also interesting going back to your research. You pointed out that other than government and policymaker, there is a role to play for businesses and consumers here. So if you can help us to understand a little bit better, what are the levers they have on their hand?
Thank you. That's, of course, the key question. Now we are leaving the area of analysis and want to move to the area of solution. Please, Carmine and Wrishi, allow me to take a step back and first look at the government approach, the regulatory approach. And then once we have looked at that, we then can move to the corporate solution possibilities. So let's start again with the externalities. So what does economics tell us when we have externalities? How can we overcome externalities? There, the solution is, just like in the tobacco case, we need to put a price on externalities. This is done, for example, in the European Union with an emission trading system. Here in Switzerland, we have a carbon tax, for example, on heating oil and heating gas. So there the idea is, if it's external, move it internal, move it into the markets. And that is a job of regulators and governments. So then, however, we have again the tragedy of the commons. Now, Switzerland and Europe, earlier, Carmine, you mentioned California. California has this too. They have done this, but now they are at an economic disadvantage. Now the tragedy of the commons shows up again, that it's now cheaper to produce elsewhere. We may be losing jobs and we may see companies leaving Europe, Switzerland, California as a result. So here now, we would need to get a global standard on taxes. We are still far away from that. And then earlier, I already mentioned Elinor Ostrom, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. And in her last writings before she died, she said, the governments cannot overcome this tragedy of the commons. They are so looking out for themselves. So they will never solve this. And so she then said, maybe we have to do this on a corporate level or on an industry level. That there, the companies get together and say, we need to cooperate for the common good. So let's think of two strong competitors that are in an industry, but they realize that their actions have externalities and they do harm, that they agree on a standard within the industry. We see this now here. There's a lot of, there are good initiatives, but there's also a lot of criticisms from some NGOs whether some of these initiatives may be greenwashing. So I will give some names or give some examples, but I'm hesitating this is not meant as an endorsement. I strongly endorse carbon tax, carbon permits, and so on. Here, I'm by no means am I endorsing it. So, for example, the vanilla producers in the world got together so in farming, in particular in emerging countries, there's also a lot of child labor, which we in the Western world consider to be very bad. And so there, the big sellers here of vanilla or companies that use vanilla in their products have gone together to say we want to rule out child labor, we want to pay minimal amounts of money for vanilla, and we want to teach our farmers around the globe how to farm more sustainably. Now, so here, everyone now has slightly higher costs, but people agree on these higher costs. And so that's where we see some initiative from corporates to do this. The big hurdle corporates have is that it's and I hear this at IMD. Yeah, you mentioned I'm at a private business school in Lausanne in Switzerland. We have I see a lot of managers who want to, who lead companies, who are executives or leader, who would love to incur higher costs for the common good, for the environment, for the children around the world, so not to employ them. But they are facing a fiduciary duty to their board and their shareholders. What is that? The fiduciary duty in accounting means that when you work for a company, you have responsibility towards the owners of this company. And that's, of course, particularly strong in the higher echelons of management. And so there, a lot of people are struggling with how to overcome tragedy of the commons, how to engage with competitors, and the sort of the expectation that they maximize profits or look out for other stakeholders in the economy. Thank you.
Karl, it has been a very enlightening episode for us, starting with the tragedy of commons and your connection, the connection that you made to climate change. I particularly was fascinated by this view of climate change as an externality. And then, the discussion that we've had now on the levers that are at hand to deal with climate change. And the way you explained it, I think, has made it very clear for us and our audience as well. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure Carmine did as well. So all I can do at this point is thank you for participating in this podcast. It has been a very enlightening one for me.
Thank you, Carmine and Wrishi. It has been an honor and a pleasure to contribute to your podcast series, and you're doing a good job here, and I wish you much success.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Karl.
you.
Thank you.